Hello, everyone. Welcome to UMD Media. The weekly H panel starts now.
Okay.
We are live on Facebook, YouTube, hopefully on other platforms as well. We are starting with experimenting with Twitter, LinkedIn, and other platforms. Please share, subscribe, like, so that we have more viewership than we normally have. And the H panel is full house today, and that gives me great pleasure. Welcome again, gentlemen. Great to have you back. So today we'll be talking about the new commission.
Yeah.
It's called the International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia. Who are these commissioners, the three commissioners, and how the panel sees them playing their role in the coming months? Because there is, I think, June, July reporting first, and then September, October reporting we'll be exploring. But as usual, we start with what stood out for you. So today we'll start with Yosef. Yosef, what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
All right. I believe it was the talk of the town. Eritrea's quixotic defense of Russia, not only once but twice. First in the General Assembly, and I think it was yesterday in Geneva, in the UNHCR Council, which it is a member of, and in the last one, it was the only nation that voted no, besides Russia, of course, besides Russia. So the question is, why? Why did Eritrea do this? I believe it's not. I mean, it's a foolhardy. You know, I could say it's quixotic, but then again, if you look from the Eritrean side, it's almost a calculated risk. The first one is Eritrea feels it has nothing to lose. Already.
Yosef, sorry for the interruption. Can you briefly mention what these two votings were about? Because, I mean, this will give our audience a background to what the votes were about.
Okay. I think on the General Assembly, on the Geneva one, it was a condemnation of Russia for its Ukraine invasion, and I believe also they wanted to create an independent commission to investigate the war crimes and if war crimes and genocide is being committed in Ukraine. The General Assembly one, I believe it's a similar one, but I haven't really looked at it in its particularity. But anyway, what I found in both instances is that it came to the defense of Russia. For example, from the entire Africa, it's the only nation that came to support Russia. And the second case, from the entire 47 members of the UNHCR Council, it was also the only nation that came to fully support Russia. So let me go now to why I think it's a calculated risk on the side of Eritrea. First, Eritrea feels it has nothing to lose. Already its lifeline is disconnected from the West. It's not entirely true, but that's what it believes, that further sanctions would have little impact on an already dead economy, which is not in any way linked with the US. And besides, it's hoping that the Arab world, both the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are going to bail it out. And of course, there is a new cash cow, which is Ethiopia. That's another source of income also for Eritrea. So it feels that it is safe from whatever comes from the Western world. Of course, Ethiopia cannot do that. It cannot afford to antagonize the West, which has been financing it. Even the war. Even the war machine itself. I don't think it would have been possible without the West financing Ethiopia in billions. So Ethiopia cannot afford to do what Eritrea did, and at the same time, also it cannot afford to antagonize Russia. So probably it took the only course it could possibly take. In this point, it's not even abstention, but it was total absence from the floor. The second one, I believe, is, as in the case of Ethiopia, it wants Russia veto power. It's very essential also for Eritrea. If the United Nations decides, to further put sanctions on Eritrea, or there is this accusation of genocide over Eritrea, that's looming over Eritrea, it feels that it will always need Russia's veto power on its side. The third one is, and here I'm speculating, Eritrea might even feel the only way it could protect itself now, especially with the peace process going on right now. It feels that if Ethiopia and Tigray come to some kind of a peaceful agreement, it will be isolated. It will need a protector, a bigger protector than the UAE or Saudi Arabia can provide in that area. And my suspicion is that it would even go as far as giving a base along the Red Sea, be it in Asab or Massawa or in the Dahlak Islands to Russia. The fourth one is Eritrea, as we know, is a nation that has massively intervened in Tigray. So it's not lost on the Eritrean leadership that there is a parallel, there is a parallelism between what's happening in Ukraine and what has happened in Tigray. The fifth one, which I believe is a little bit more nuanced in its way, is that Eritrea, by standing out, by making itself visible to the entire world, by voting twice, by coming to the defense of Russia twice, I don't think the world has taken note of this small nation, that has boldly come out to the defense of Tigray. So by making it visible, it's making it a little bit harder on the US to take any kind of immediate steps against Eritrea. It's like an abused woman who informs the neighborhood that if anything suspicious happens to her, if she dies under suspicious circumstances, it would be her husband. She's doing two things. One is she's taking them as witnesses. The other thing is that it hopes that it will deter her husband from doing such a thing. So in the Eritrean case also, it coming out boldly, to be seen throughout the world, it's also in a way, it's also hoping that the world notices if anything happens to it. The last one is, of course, we cannot discount the antipathy that Isaias Afwerki have for the West in general, or for the US in particular. And that is what is as usual, in every speech that he comes up with, he always is griping, about the US, about the CIA, which he calls Langley, Fukuyama and Huntington, and unilateralism, US imperialism, and everything that connected with the US, and he feels, as a vindictive fellow, he feels, and his timing is always perfect, he feels that he will throw a punch right now, at this particular time, against the US, and that is what he did. But having said that, it doesn't mean that you will get away scot-free from here. Remember, that in the case of the TPLF, their biggest mistake was that they have let Isaias, through their containment policy, they have let Isaias survive for about 20 years. He was the one who bided his time, to strike against them. The same thing is happening now also with the West. The West believed that it has contained Isaias. In fact, I believe their conclusion was he might be a danger to his people, but he's no more a danger to his neighborhood or to the West. That was their conclusion up to now. But he is doing exactly what he did against the TPLF. He bided his time and he is striking now. So I hope the West would go for regime change right now and try to sanction him where it hurts the most, the mining companies and the arms embargo.
Okay.
I will stop there. Sorry.
Yes, yes, yeah. Professor Eskel, what stood out for you this week?
What stood out for me this week, it actually emanates from the tail end of what we discussed the other week. I think it's the confluence of two events that are contradictory, fundamentally contradictory, but they also show something about the Ethiopian state and the Ethiopian state of affairs. One is the Adwa 126th anniversary celebration in Addis Ababa. It was chaotic, it was controversial, and eminently political event. In its entire history, Adwa was supposed to be celebrated as a victory that thwarted Italian imperialist campaign and Italy's ambition to build a colonial empire in the Horn of Africa. Adwa became preeminent as a symbol of Pan-Africanism, as a symbol of a black victory, but most importantly that it secured Ethiopia's sovereignty. But in Addis Ababa this week, it was denigrated by extremists who were calling for more war within Ethiopia and apparently trying to stage a coup d'etat in Addis Ababa by appointing a new mayor just meters away from the building of the municipality. But what is important about that is that it was an expression of support for aggression and a violation of sovereignty, because there were Russian flags that were being waved at that event, apparently in support of aggression. So in general, what it was showing was the flags, the Ethiopian, supposedly the three-striped Ethiopian flag was waved in support of aggression within the country. They were calling for more war within Ethiopia itself, and in support of Russian aggression against Ukraine. That's the first event. On the opposite end, something happened this week. That is, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia sent a letter, or published a letter that he sent to the people of Ukraine and Russia. First, it showed me, the letter, the content of the letter showed, not me, just to everybody, the Prime Minister's fantasy never ends. 4 years ago, he had published a letter that he ostensibly wrote to the people of Yemen, in which he basically admonished the people of Yemen for destroying their civilization and absolving the aggressors, the Saudi Arabian government and the UAE, as if they did nothing, that this was really a war between competing factions within Yemen, had nothing to do with the aggression from the neighbors. At the time, it was the Prime Minister was excused as being a novice at diplomacy and world diplomacy in general. This time, it's just amazing that a prime minister who had elevated the victory of Adwa, in which Ethiopia's sovereignty was actually secured, at the same time comes to the global stage to declare that he supports the violation of the rules-based state system in the world and the architecture of peace and security in general. A prime minister who was last year gung-ho about the sovereignty, that Ethiopia's sovereignty was violated by Ethiopians, by Tigrayans, now sided with an aggressor that violated the sovereignty of another country. Thirdly, it is really quite alarming that a prime minister who came to office as a Democrat and a reformist at least is now squarely on the side of an autocrat, dictator, and an aggressor. That there is no contradiction for him. There is no fear that this would probably put some blemish on his credentials that would make him acceptable to the world. Just against that, he's really coming in support of an aggressor, ostensibly in support of an aggressor, because his ambassador to the United Nations was nowhere to be seen to cast the vote that even Eritrea had the courage to vote against or in support of the Russian aggression. Now, what it showed me is the conference is, it showed the failure of the process of decision making in Ethiopia. It showed me the failure of institutional autonomy, that these kinds of things, 4 years after a very disturbing letter to the people of Yemen, he comes out and does the same, blaming the victim. It shows that governance in the country, failure of governance and the loss of control over the institutions of governing after 3 years of building an autocratic governance model, which is now challenged within Ethiopia through war, but is still, it shows that this has come to a screeching halt in Ethiopia. The one person, one man in Arat Kilo deciding on just about everything, whether that is a military adventure or diplomacy or anything or economy, that one person could rule a country of 100 million people without help from anybody else, without any institutional support, without any legal support, looks like that it is coming to a screeching halt right now.
Thank you, Professor Sgel. I think it's worth mentioning that yesterday, he wrote this letter on restraint in Ukraine crisis, what he calls Ukraine crisis, and today he bombed Tigray with a drone. So this is the irony of everything there. Faisal, what stood out for you this week?
Yes, thank you very much. I think just a couple of quick updates. The USAID deputy mission today visited Kombolcha in Desse, and apparently Desse entirely as it exists today is fed by USAID, the food. They are pressuring the government also to see if they can open up corridors for Tigray. Having said that, as an update, I think what stood for me was also just the internal crisis that is happening in Ethiopia and how that is trickling it down to the Somali region. Up until now, the Somali region was supposed to be the peace domain, which those of us who have been following very closely knew that that area was peaceful, not because of Abiy's entourage and the people he installed in the offices, but because ONLF signed that peace treaty in 2018, and they have been really observing that peace. Now, with that peace being eroded, it looks like things are falling apart, and for the first time, both the public there as well as the whatever that weakened federal government presided by Abiy, whatever power it has, it's paying more attention. As you remember, 2 weeks ago, the federal government dispatched an investigative team to go down to Jigjiga and literally investigate all the complaints taking place in that region. So the three areas that they focused were, number one, I'll just come back to that, but and this is in reaction to what I'm saying. The three areas that they like to focus on: one, the leakage of huge amount of US dollars through Togo Chale, which Abiy also talked at the parliament in his speech, and the gas and oil, at least gasoline, that's intended for that region, as well as for other regions to bring it and sell in a black market and ship to Somaliland. That's number one. It's a huge leakage, both money-wise as well as oil. The second is apparently Mustafa and his team literally built a system of aristocracy that the entire top echelon of the decision-making and contract systems are taken over by his family, whether it is his father, his brother, his sister, and what have you. So that also came as a result of people complaining and the government ignoring. The third area that they like to look at is massive corruption. I mean, if the money that is said to have been spent in that region is true, it's probably mind-boggling, from international aid to federal budget to monies allocated for farming, which was never used. If you recall, I was one of the first people who talked about the money allocated for mitigation of the looming famine were used in October for the election. And the local government of Mustafa Omar literally approached Medexa, and her officers said, don't finance us, we have enough money, not knowing that they were talking about the money that is allocated for farming. So the Electoral Commission office took the money and spent. Now the local government of Somali region wanted to get that money, but they never really gave in a systemic way. That's how they conduct business. They didn't keep receipts. It was just an informal transferring money, and this money was discussed at the cabinet, so they cannot hide. And so the corruption level went so far to a point where even it startled Addis Ababa and Abiy. So what was very interesting was the investigative team that went down there did not even honor to meet with him. They met with people whose lists that they had on their own. They never met with his top confidante. They met people that they already arranged on their own. They also went to Togojale, the border town, and did survey and what have you. And then they met the people who were arrested, some of them out, including 3 former presidents who now stand as opposition. And then right away, while this investigation was wrapping up, the Mecca Mukonin, without any notification, without any notice, without any fanfare, just came down by himself. How do you read this? I think different people are reading it differently. Some people are saying the Mecca came down to him to solicit Mustafa's support in his own conflict with Abiy in terms of the PP struggle. Others are saying Demeka is known during the EPRDF to carry the death message to whoever is being yanked or whatever. Having said that, I think we cannot verify either of that. What we do know is that everybody was surprised by Demeka's, not even media people were following him. It was just a in and out kind of thing. So the Somali region is in crisis with that. Tomorrow, I think there is a conference of 3 opposition parties in Nairobi: ONLF, the Somali Congress, and the Federalist group headed by former Liberation Movement head Abdi Randere. So I think the Somali region finally is, I don't want to call it falling apart, but finally demanding some accountability and transparency. Up until now, Mustafa was protected by Abiy, and he's still protected by Abiy. The question is, with the upcoming of the PP national conference, will Somalis see some reform that will take place also in other regions, or Abiy would keep Mustafa as he earlier parachuted him without any prior political experience or prior relation to the region in terms of its policies and public policy. I think the farming situation is still getting worse. One of the accusations, I just want to conclude on this one, one of the accusations that came with a report Toyota released yesterday on this issue, and they did an excellent reportage of the information that they have been collecting from Addis Ababa. One issue that they threw into the mix is that Mustafa's chief of staff, who was the past immediate chief security officer, who is also Mustafa's cousin, was apparently in 2017 serving as Somalia's ambassador, which Farmacho nominated. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct. What I'm sure is that the pan-Ethiopianists are using that now to say that that whole region is out of hand. I do differ on that report in the sense that Mustafa is more than pan-Ethiopianist than Menelekites, but I think maybe whoever prepared that report wants to highlight that that region is out of hand as far as the federal government is concerned. So I'll start.
Okay, great. Thank you, Faisal. So let's go to the topic of the day. So today we want to talk about the newly appointed the International Human Rights Expert Commission on Ethiopia. So this is following the 17th December 2021 resolution from the UN Human Rights Council. And we know now that these are the three commissioners. So the question is, how did you see this? What is your take on who these are and how this investigation might play out? Because what we have as a timeline is in June, July, for the fifth, I think, session, they will report briefly, orally. And then in October, or September, October, they would go back again, report. They would submit a written report. So we are talking about months. So maybe now is March. So we are talking about maybe 5-6 months for the total reporting. Let's go to Yosef. What's your take on that? You are muted, I guess. Let me just. Yeah. Now. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Before I do that, I would like to respond to Faisal's. He said it reminds me the way Abiy treats the Somaliland reminds me of the way Putin treats Chechnya. In regard to Chechnya, he created a mini dictator, and he literally told him to do whatever he wants to do with Chechnya, so far as the problem is contained within Chechnya itself. I see that kind of parallelism in between the way Abiy treats the Somali Khalil and the way Putin treats Chechnya. But let me go back to the main topic. I see. Three things from the experts that have been nominated. Fatu, I think if I am correcting it, I pronounce it right. Fatu Bensouda of Gambia. The first thing that you see is that all of them have formidable resumes. She has been for 9 years, I believe, an ICC in the International Criminal Court, a chief prosecutor. And then there is Kari Betty Murungi of Kenya, who has been, among others, which have been also a vice chairman of Kenya HRC. And then there is Stephen R. Ratner, who is a Michigan, he's a professor in a Michigan Law School. Among many others, his specialty is also in international humanitarian law. But more importantly, he has been before elected in among experts that went to Cambodia and Sri Lanka two places known for their genocides. So you could see they have a formidable regimes. Number two that I noticed about them is there is no Obasanjo syndrome when it comes to this regard. They don't come with a loaded past when it comes to the relationship with Ethiopia, which is very important. And the third one is we have to remember that they have come to the scene as an antidote to the farce of the joint Ethiopian and UN Commission, blessed by none other than Antonio Guterres, that has been discredited by its flawed report. So if you look at these three criteria, then it seems to be a good start. Where I have a problem is a general one, the very structure of it. In the very structure of it, there is always something odd about sending an independent team to examine crimes against humanity or whatever other crimes in an area where the genocide is still going on. Think about, for example, Rwanda. In Rwanda, it took about 100 days, to kill about 800,000 people. Think if hypothetically, if the UN had sent a team of experts to examine whether genocide is taking place in Rwanda, let's say halfway through it, after 50 days, what happens is by the time they have studied and reported, the genocide is almost over. So this kind of investigation teams or squads, I believe they are better when a genocide is done and over and they are called to look at it, when the genocide is complete. But they are almost ineffective to stop a genocide that is going on. Why? Precisely because it requires a suspension of belief on the side of examiners, on the side of the experts. It's a suspension of beliefs that a genocide is taking place. They would say that it could only come as an end result of their investigation. So what the Abiy government has done, for example, the siege of Tigray, the denial of access to medicine, food, fuel, and all the things that they have done while they were inside Tigray, all the massacres and all the rapes and all that stuff, it clearly shows that a genocide is going on. But this is the thing that they have to suspend in order to examine what's going on inside. I think a better picture would be one that I have used before, is to look at Tigray as a concentration camp, for example. In all kinds of concentration camps, what happens is the people that are targeted, the victims, are separated from the general population and moved into concentration camps. But in the case of Tigray, since the entire 6 million people are the ones that are targeted, then there is no need to move them out of Tigray and put them in concentration camps. Besides being costly and besides the fact that the Tigray people would resist, there is no need. All that you have to do is encircle Tigray. And that's exactly what they have done. The rest is, you see, if there are other Tigrayans outside of that encircled area, like, for example, what happened in Western Tigray, all that you have to do is move them to the concentration camp. And that's exactly what they have done. When they ethnically cleansed more than 1 million people, they moved them into the concentration camp. The other one is you don't need to have barbed wires, or formidable walls with watchtowers, the quintessential picture of what a concentration camps looks like in the case of Tigray. All that you need is the hundreds of thousands of soldiers from Eritrea, Amhara, Afar, and Ethiopia to completely seal off Tigray, and that's what exactly they have done. And if we go inside Tigray, it also meets all the conditions of what the concentration camp looks like. I mean, people are dying because of war, of lack of medicine, and of starvation. And that's exactly what's happening, what happens in concentration camps. Why am I bringing this thing? Okay. Because you see, when you call it genocide, when you are dealing with a genocide, you are dealing at the two ends, at its two ends, at its deed end and the intention end. The deed has to be big enough or large enough to be considered genocide, but there has also to be an intention. Somebody has to do it intentionally. Now, if you look at a concentration camp, the normal concentration camp with barbed wires and walls, the intention is written in the building itself. There is no ambiguity. If you look at the concentration camp, then you know that whoever is building the concentration camp and whoever is bringing people into that concentration camp is committing genocide. The ambiguity comes in the case of Tigray precisely because that's not how it is conducted. Now, even though the famine, the rampant disease, and the siege of Tigray have all the signs of a concentration camp. Now, this is my fear. My fear is this. I know this team, these experts of team, will do a much better job than the Joint Commission. Why? Because the Joint Commission, remember, it almost was a joke because they went to over 4 or 5 places and concluded that some kind of crimes against humanity have been committed, but that no genocide has taken place in Tigray. That was their conclusion. We now know that there are almost 300 sites in Tigray where massacres have been conducted. And that doesn't include the western part of Tigray, which I believe is the biggest killing field in Ethiopia right now. So I'm sure their scope, the scope of their investigation will be much larger. But the fear that I have is by focusing on, for example, on those massacres, on rapes that happened inside Tigray, they will miss the bigger picture. That bigger picture being the siege of Tigray itself. The intention of Abiy could easily be seen by the siege of Tigray. He's not allowing anything inside Tigray. He has cut off all kinds of services, and he's not allowing food, medicine, fuel, or anything like that. So for anybody who looks it from outside, it's clear that genocide is taking place. But for those, in order to go inside Tigray, to see whether genocide is taking or other kinds of crimes is taking place, is like getting into prison to see if there are any prisoners in it, if the people inside the prison qualify as a prison. You are excluding the fact that that prison has been built in order to capture the prisoners in Tigray. So for me, I'm hoping that they are not going to be confined. These experts are not going to be confined in going village after village, to look at massacres and rapes only, but also at the general structure of the genocide itself. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I think the scope, as mentioned in this statement released, is in Ethiopia committed since 3rd of November 2020 by all parties to the conflict. So I think the scope is broader. And Professor Skell?
I guess the question is about the who, and maybe the how. I will talk about it a little bit later. But I think the mission, to speak to the mission first, is the 3-person commission is charged with the responsibility of first establishing the facts, and it says establishing the facts and the circumstance surrounding the alleged violations, and that's important because accountability and everything else begins with establishing the facts. That is their commission. Second, to identify those who are responsible for the atrocity crimes that were committed. All of the atrocity crimes that were committed, that is, which means the crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, rape, genocide, and everything. They will establish the facts of what happened, and they will identify who actually committed them. And then, of course, they will make wherever possible, it says, wherever possible, they make their findings available to those who are concerned to bring about accountability for the crimes committed. So those are important charges as far as I'm concerned. But the how, I think what it shows me to, at least what I read from the announcement, the press release, three things about the composition, the who of the people that are in there. It shows me something about competence in experience of the three individuals, but also the diversities of experience and competence that they have, and I'll speak to that shortly. Second, it also shows me the intention. What is going to be done? What is the intention behind or the rationale that necessitated the nomination of the three individuals, and what their mission is going to be. And the third is the seriousness with which they are approaching the commission's work. Competence, as far as competence is concerned, there are three competencies or fields of competence that I see in the composition. One is a prosecutor, an experienced prosecutor at the International Criminal Court, but also an experienced person in the trial and the trial of criminal crimes that were committed, namely the International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda. That is an important competence and experience that comes for a prosecutor when selecting an experienced prosecutor as a member of the commission. The second is a rights advocate, and that's a different kind of experience and competence that she brings. That is Kari Betty Murungi of Kenya, and I was earlier talking about Fatou Bensouda of Gambia, of course, the prosecutor, and then the rights advocate, particularly women's rights and gender-based violence and human rights human rights violations in the context of violent conflict. So the Kari Betty Murungi is a rights advocate, human rights lawyer, in experience with rights violations, the gender-based violations in the context of conflict, and that is really important. But also she has experience in the Kenya Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because after the finding, something needs to happen after such a violent conflict that had affected the conscience of the world, the genocide and crimes, atrocity crimes that were committed in Ethiopia, particularly in Tigray. The third area of competency is a scholar at the University of Michigan, not very far from where I live right now. And he also has, as a scholar, he brings competence and experience as an international international law, a public international law, international humanitarian law, accountability for human rights violations. And something that is important that I saw maybe distinguish this scholar from others is that he has also experience in the corporate and state duties regarding foreign investment. There is a reason for that kind of, including for this kind of expertise and competence. Now, the intention, what does that show? The intention of the UN Commission. When they bring the prosecutor, to me, what it shows me is that they intend to prosecute people who have committed the atrocity crimes, the alleged atrocity crimes after the facts are established. And therefore, to have a prosecutor, an experienced prosecutor, look into these facts and then establish them is an important indication of what the intention is. Second, the rights advocate, human rights advocate, a lawyer for that, but also experienced in transitional justice processes. This is appropriate, an appropriate qualification, an appropriate experience to be brought to bear in the composition of the commission. The truth and reconciliation experience is also important, but the intention is to focus on the gender-based violence that were committed, alleged gender-based violence that were committed in Tigray or maybe anywhere else in Ethiopia. That tells me the intention of what the composition, bringing Kari Betty Murungi as a member of that commission. And the third is, I think a scholar is needed. A scholar in international law and international humanitarian law is important because the humanitarian law that exists on the books in the world, that's also been violated. Taken together, the composition, the expertise, and the experiences that these people, three scholars, a scholar and a rights advocate and a prosecutor bring to the table also shows me the seriousness now, the seriousness with which the Human Rights Commission is approaching the task of investigating and establishing the fact, identify the perpetrators, and make the findings available for accountability. So those are the three things that I see there in terms of the composition and who are these, who these people are in the commission.
Great. Faisal?
Yeah, I will not go back to the qualifications and background of these three wonderful jurists and lawyers that have been picked. I just want to emphasize the concept that Joseph threw out, which really rings bell with me, in the sense that for all, not definition, but for all practical purposes, because lawyers work usually with what are on the books in terms of definition and law and what have you. So they probably have their own definition of what concentration camp is. But I think from greater concept, I think anybody today can say that Tigray region is a sort of a geographic location where people are kept and don't have the right and the ability to get what they want, where to move, if they can have the food that they want, all issues that enhances the happiness and the quality of life and the livelihood of a human being seems to have been, if not 100% deprived, completely limited. So I think the greater focus that Joseph gave to that definition rings bell with me. And given that rosy qualification of the three, I like to take a different route and probably put my pessimistic hat and skeptic, if you will, on this issue. First of all, I think the three are highly qualified, and no question about that. I think if anybody would probably push facts the way they are, it would be Stephen Ratner of the United States. With the two African jurists, I have my own doubt, being an African and knowing Africa. Fatua, with all her qualification and her international stature, was Attorney General and Minister of Justice when Gambia was having its worst situation, and a dictator and an autocrat who came as a reformer just like Abiy was abusing. And actually she stayed till 2000 and served from that dictator from 1998 up to 2000, where Gambia really went through the tubes in terms of human rights. So she's another attorney general, and probably she will be working, or at least have some affinity with the general attorney of Ethiopia, who already congratulated the panel. Kerry, I think the way Scale put it right, she has a very, very rich resume of standing up for women and human rights and what have you, and worked on a lot of indigent women questions and issues. But this is my misgiving with both of them. we were celebrating, and I think Joseph Scale happily talked about the Menelik factor. With African intellectuals, in my own pessimistic and skeptic Somali attitude, I am afraid that the Ethiopian myth could corrupt their judgment. They may really not be able to escape from the heavy weight and stature of the so-called Ethiopia as the example of Africa. It's very interesting. In the 1977, when the Somali war against Ethiopia was going on, Andrew Yang and Cyrus Vance were literally leading an entire public policy makers of the United States, lobbying for a dictator in Ethiopia, Mengistu Haile Mariam, under the banner of the Africanists. They were called the Africanists within the United States. That even the Dergi was killing students to the tune of 10,000 in the Red Terror, the bloodshed in Eritrea, the bloodshed in the Somali region. They still were protecting the Derg and lobbying. Then even Henry Kissinger, who came later on, wanted to keep Ethiopia on his side, thinking that Ethiopia is too big to be ignored. Where I'm driving at is knowing African politics, knowing that Kenya has very good relationship with Ethiopia, knowing that most Africans fall, particularly the elite, fall for the mystic of Ethiopia. I am honestly skeptic, given irregardless of their background, that they may not take me where I want. That's number one. Number two, I'm very weary about the short time given to this commission to do investigative work and do their first report in June or July. That's about 3 months, 4 months. Are they going to really do a good, how many people would be working for them? Are they going to do a primary data search? Are they going to just, flip, those pages and books that have already been done, which are not kosher in many ways? Are they going to, and somewhere I read in this, where they would be working in collaboration with the Ethiopian Human Rights Council. Again, here we are falling on that trap. And then another issue is who would be the researchers? Because Tigray is not accessible and they would be working through the Ethiopian government. So who would be doing the field work? That thousands of people who would be collecting information, or they will just go to a secondary information with a small number of interviews and come to that conclusion and do their first findings. They will have three structures. I think the first report would be somewhere around June, and then the last one would be September, October. A very tight. And basically, a commission like this would have required a longer time. And I'm not optimistic, particularly, sorry to really say that, with these two highly qualified Africans, but my Somali experience always gives me that red light to go on when I see African intellectuals being a judge and a jury on the Ethiopian question.
Thank you, Faisal. I think that covers the topic. Maybe we will finish with what is your final word, and our viewers are following and interacting with the perspectives that are coming in a diverse and insightful way. So, Faisal, Yusuf, what is your final word before we finish today? You are muted. Let me unmute you. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, I will go back to the Eritrean case with a comic twist, I guess. I believe you have read, I wish I had sent it to you before, but I believe you have read the U.S. Embassy from Asmara, Eritrea, in response to Yemane Gebre Meskel's, Yemane Gebre Meskel wrote on the Eritrean vote, for Russia. Eritrea's vote is a demonstration of its uncompromising stand for peace. Its position is against further polarization and the escalation of the situation, with enormous implications for civilians. Of course, you could easily see what he's doing, what Emmanuel Gabriel Pascal is doing. So the embassy wrote back, this double speak out Orwell's Orwell 1984 and the War and Peace, in quotation marks, War and Peace. Minister Yemane says Eritrea's no vote in a UN resolution condemning the unprovoked violent aggression of one state against a weaker state demonstrates, in quotation mark, an uncompromising stand for peace. So the hypocrisy that previously Faisal, Hezkel was mentioning in regard to Abiy, with his letter, with his what was it? A call for restrained letter. You could see a similar kind of hypocrisy also in this one. But also, what is also interesting is that there is also a hypocrisy at a different level, even at the U.S. level, at the West level, even as it mocks the Eritrean foreign minister. It seems that when you look at what is going on in Ukraine right now, the way they reacted, the way the West reacted quickly and massively in order to solve the Ukrainian crisis, compared with what has been happening for about 16 months in Tigray. You could see the hypocrisy and the double standard. The way the UN, the IC, the international community in general, and the ICC reacted very quickly. For example, ICC, it's now trying to look at, imagine, whether genocide is being committed in Ukraine. Up to now, the number of civilians killed in Ukraine in this massive, war only amounts to about hundreds. Yet they wanted to call this a genocide. In fact, even the Geneva one is looking one of the tasks that they have assigned is to investigate whether genocide is taking place in Ukraine, with only hundreds of people killed up to now. Yet, if you go back to Tigray, you see tens of thousands have been killed, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, of course, but the civilians, tens of thousands of civilians have been killed, and tens of thousands raped, and all of these things has happened, and yet up to now, let alone to call it genocide, the UN hasn't even described, the starvation that is taking place right now in Tigray as a famine. So you could see the double standard and the hypocrisy. That's all that I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Ixia, final word for the day.
All right. I'm going to kind of repeat what I was said at the beginning and last week. Ethiopia is in a multi-dimensional crisis right now. There is an economic crisis. There is a governance crisis. There is a crisis of security. All kinds of crises in the country. But the government, the example of what Abiy Ahmed wrote to the world, it shows you that, and the speech that he gave last week, if you hear that, as if these problems do not exist for him. They just do not exist. That the $17 million bakery that they promised that it would feed the entire population of Addis Ababa is closed because of lack of wheat flour. But he was talking about 300 million quintals of grain that were harvested this year in Ethiopia. And people are saying, where is it? Where is the 300 million? What I'm trying to say is that the crisis is grinding, the government is denying. That is the point. That's the point where people and their government starts to diverge, to go in different ways. I think what we see today, and I'm going to go back to this issue of the human rights. Now, whether the Ethiopian government is going to allow them in to do their job is a matter of, it's in question. I don't think they will. They will find a way to blockade them. Whether they will be able to bring anybody to justice is just a matter of, but to be able to create even the facts, I think it's a worthy effort to try. Because Ethiopia is in a country that is in moving from one crisis to another crisis. So when governments are unable to understand the plight of their own people, when they're totally tone deaf to the realities that are lurking on the underground, that is the beginning of the divergence of state and society. That is really where Ethiopia is. One example for this divergence is, and that there is the party that governs Ethiopia, the Prosperity Party. These are parties that are absolutely not cut from the same cloth. They don't have the same ideology. They were simply put together because Abiy Ahmed wanted them. Now, the fault line is becoming clear. And they are not only at loggerheads, they are in an open tug of war. What I saw in Jijiga when the Makonnen went there unannounced, showed up there, and the Somali president was in Asmara, what I saw is that the glue that is holding this party together is coming apart because the Mecca was in the Somali region, looking for votes next time for votes to be supported to remain the prime minister, because the proposal in the Prosperity Party is to divvy up his responsibility between two deputy prime ministers, a proposal that he fought and lost. Now he is in the Somali region to drum up support for him to remain the prime minister, the only prime minister, and even get that prime ministership as a deputy prime minister position. This is a party that is really coming apart. If the party that is governing is really not on the same page, and working at cross purposes, the multi-dimensional crisis is wreaking havoc in the country. Nothing has been resolved in the country. The war, we know, hasn't ended. The economic problems is still raging. In this country, if the government is completely tone deaf, there is a crisis of governance. Country is not being governed. And I'm trying to just warn everybody else that the worst is about to come very, very soon.
Thank you. Faisal, final word?
Yes, I think, first of all, I like really to caution most of our audience not to really expect a lot from this international commission to investigate Ethiopia's human rights. I think it's good that people of such a caliber are on there, but not to expect. Because I think if you just look, and I think Scale eloquently described how the government MPP is falling apart. But if you even take that issue further, the current Ethiopian government has lost its legitimacy in the sociological sense, that it doesn't have legitimacy from the people, it doesn't have legitimacy from the regions, it doesn't have legitimacy even from the ones that were supporting a few months ago. The only area where the Ethiopian government enjoys undivided legitimacy is from the international community, headed by the West. That West and its investigation would probably come with some reports that can give Abiy probably either the opportunity to become stronger in the position in which he is, so that they can help him, give him money, legitimize him further, because that's the legitimacy he has, he can also probably look deeply into what they are offering to him and move away from where he is and seek some of that legitimacy from within, where he doesn't have legitimacy. He completely lost the legitimacy from the people of Ethiopia. And how can he get that? I think probably it's time for his people to start talking about a new coalition that he can build. If he has the international legitimacy, how can Abiy get inbred legitimacy from the broader sections of the community? And that should include some of the people that he already wronged, i.e. Tigray, Oromo, and Somalis. Does he need to really revisit his party and his vision and see if he can reorient and start a new narrative that really puts people of the periphery into the center of the governance and the ideology? Because up to this point, he has been towing to the old centrist thinking of what Ethiopia is. Is there an opportunity for him if this International Human Rights Commission gives him a lukewarm kind of, slapping on the wrist, can he take that and with the legitimacy that he has from the international world and reorient himself and his narrative to bring his party and his governance to share with the periphery people, which he has not done so far, both in terms of historical recognition of where they have been, their struggles, and their wishes and their aspirations. He ignored all those. Can he use this as an opportunity? Although we are not expecting a lot to be coming out of this, can he really reorient himself, have backdoor channel with Tigray and TDF, the same with Oromo leadership, and also, as Yosef said, move away from this Putin Chechnya type treatment of the Somali region, the Sidama, the Gambela. I think Yosef did capture that concept, where some regions are still treated as a secondary and second-class citizen, and they are treated the same way that Chechnya is treated within the Russian domain. I think he can use this if he has open mind. The question is Abiy capable to do that? Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. And thank you, everyone. We are done for today, but we'll definitely revisit this commission as it starts its work, and maybe by June and September as it reports back to the council. And of course, there is a lot to follow in Ethiopia, and we'll be back with yet another H panel next week. Thank you for your time, and good night from here. You have been following us live on Facebook and YouTube, the weekly H panel. Today's topic was the new International Commission of Human Rights Experts on Ethiopia, who and how. I'm confident that our audience received some insightful perspectives on the who and the how, and we'll be following that back, as I said before. Before I sign off for today, there are a couple of announcements for tomorrow and Sunday in Tigrinya and Amharic. صباح تግራይ ኣበየላ ላበይ ብኸመይ ትኽድ ምስ ብሩኽ ረዳ ለኣከ ዘገየ ምሉ ብርሃን ኣሰፋ እዚ ንሓምሻይ ግዜ ዝቐርብ ዘሎ እዩ መበል 15 ሰባት ኢና ብዙ ቶፒክ እዚ ነዛርብ ዘለና ጽባሕ ፍሊ ዝገብሮ እታ ናይ መጨረሻ 30 ደቂቓ ቀጥታ ተመልከቲ ሰማዕቲ ኣቲኹም ብስልኪ ቀጥታ ነቶም ፓነሊስት ክትሓትሉ ትኽእሉ መሻሽና ኣለና ጽባሕ ላይቭ ተኸታተሉና 1 p.m. Eastern Time እዩ 1 p.m. Eastern Time ብሩኽ ረዳ ለኣከ ዘገየ ሙሉ ብርሃን ኣሰፋ ክመጽኦም ላይቭ ብስልኪ ብኢንተርኔት ደውልኩም ቀጥታ ኣብ ስቱዲዮ ኣቲኹም ብድምጺ ተሓቱ ትኽእሉ ኢኹም that will be tomorrow 1 p.m. and ድሕሪ ሓደ ሰሙን ደሞ ሰለስተ ሰባት ኣምጺና ይባቤ ጥላሁን ሚኪ ራያ ከምኡ እውን ሓየሎም ካብ ኣውሮፓ ደሞ ኣምጺና ዘን እስካበዚ ዝቐርባ 5 ሸዋት ኣብ ዘ ሴም ቶፒክ መጽአን ታይ ጎዲልዎን ታይ ዝውስኸሉ ኣለዉ ይስማምዑ ዶ ይስማምዑ ዝብል ከን ሪቪው ክንገብር ኢና ዝቕመጽ ዘሎ ቀዳም ማለት እዩ and in Amharic እሁድ ከዳዊት ሰለሞንና ታምሩ ሁሊሶ ጋራ ራስን የመሆንና የመጠየቅ የጸረ ሸፍጥ ክትባት በሚል ርዕስ እንመጣለን። እሁድ 1 PM ኢስተርን ታይም 1 PM ኢስተርን ታይም በቀጥታ ከታምሩ ሁሊሶ እንዲሁም ከዳዊት ሰለሞን ጋራ የጸረ ሸፍጥ ክትባት በተመለከተ በተለይ መጠየቅ እና ራስን መሆን ያንን እንፈትሻለን። ወደ ኋላ ሄደን በታሪካችንም በአሁኑ ባለው ሁኔታም ሸፍጦች እና ያንን የሚከላከሉ ክትባት በተመለከተ እናወራለን ማለት ነው። እሁድና ቅዳሜ ላይቭ የኤምዲ ሚዲያ ላይ እንገናኛለን። Thank you for your time. That was it for today. The H panel will be back next week. Bye from here.